The video. Today we're gonna go over functions. We're gonna discuss the last most fundamental programming concept I think you need to know to be a programmer. So uh, to help us get started here with the demos, let's imagine you're using a website and the website is supposed to print out some information about you. So pretty much we could just write a program that just prints out for this user. Tom has visited 10 times and he has an active subscription and he's a premium member. Okay, simple enough. Now let's imagine we want to print that a couple of times. So let's say we want to print that two times, say every 5 seconds, for example. So I already imported the time module, so we can just do time.sleep and let's say 3 seconds. So it's gonna print out the first time, it's gonna sleep 3 seconds, and it's gonna print out again. Okay. Now, if we wanted to do this every like wanted to sleep another 5 seconds, we would have to keep copying and pasting this, right? So that's where the idea of a function comes in. So instead of doing this, what we could do, if I would just clear this, what we could do is we could actually have a function that prints out each of those sentences, yeah, each of those lines of strings. Now, how do we actually call this function? If I ran this, if I would run this, nothing would happen, first of all, because I have a bug. So if I ran this again, nothing happens, right? So you have to call this function. So we define the function and we have the keyword def, it's probably short for definition of a function. That's the function name. And we have this syntax right here with the brackets or whatever that is, parentheses, yeah. So what would happen is actually most times you would put like some parameters here. So that's input you're gonna pass into the function, and then you do something with the input. But in this case, we don't need an input because we are just printing some strings, and yeah, all we have to do is just now call the function. Okay, so how do you call the function? You type the same function name, user information, and you gotta put in the parentheses at the end of it, right? So if we ran this again, we'll see it prints out. It tells us something about Tom, who's our user, who's visited 10 times, and so forth. So now, what's the problem with this? We kind of print out the information about the user inside of the function. So if there was another user, we would have to go change this here. For example, let's say Sid, right? So now it's Sid, but we had to go change that in the actual code of the function. So in the actual code, so we need a way to actually print out something based on who the user is. So let's do this. Let's get some variables and store this information there rather. So okay, so now we got a client name. We name him Tom. Same information, guys. So now what we want to do is we actually want to print out this user information based on the content of that of those variables. So we don't want to like what we call this in programming is we hard code this information here. So we don't want to do that. We want to work based on the variables. So now what I've done is I've defined. So now if I take this out, I still have no input, but I'm using variables now. So if I wanted to change the output, I would have to change it here. So first of all, let's run this again. Again, I need to put that there. So now it prints out the same thing, right? So it's still Tom 10 times and so on and so forth. But if I change this to Sid again, and I change this, so let's go with 3. And yeah, and let's say he's a premium member, okay? So now it's Sid 3 times, he's a premium member. Now in the function now I have a I'm actually working based on on what's in these variables. So we have premium member and we have a conditional. So if that's a premium member, we're gonna print out that last line. So let's make that false and let's see that change. So now it changes, right? So but the problem with this is we're still using variables, and we're not actually giving any input to the function. So what we want to do actually is we want to write the function definition as such. Right here, right? So now what we need to, if we run this, it's gonna fail because first of all we have that still, and we ran this again. Now it's gonna fail because it needs actually 4 arguments. So when you define a function, it's called the parameters, but when you call it, it's called the argument. So it needs 4 arguments, and that's defined here. And when we call this, we actually didn't call it in the correct way. So what we have to do is we need to then pass in the variables that have that data as arguments to the function. So now where we define name, we're just going to pass in the client name, visits, client visits, subscription status, and so on. Now when we run this again, it's going to print Sid 3 times, active, and currently he's not a premium member, so it's going to be false, right? So that's the use case for a function, guys. So now if we wanted to print this out after 5 seconds, what we need to do, we can just call the sleep function, and we just have to call this again. We don't have to put in 10 lines of code to print out print out the information. We could just call the function again, and if we run this again, it's going to print out once, it's going to sleep 5 seconds, and it's going to print out a second time. And you could obviously do this in a loop. If you wanted to print this out consistently over time, you would keep it in a while loop, and then you would just sleep every 5 seconds, print out, sleep, and so on and so forth. But we just want to demo this, so this just we just print it out twice right now. And now the beauty of a function is, say say the user visits, and now you want to update the number of times the user just paid a visit. What you can do is you can come here and you can then define another function that's going to take in the current amount of visits, and it's going to increase that number by 1, right? And it's going to return. So when you return, you're actually passing a value back to the calling function. So when you run your program, you have like the code, and it's kind of like a function that then calls all the other stuff in the program. But when you call a function, it's going to return a value to the function that called it. So let's say so it's pretty much, you have a default function that runs when you start your code, and then that function calls this, and this is going to return a value back to that function. And how can we get that value, guys? So what we need to do here is we need to somehow get that information stored. So let's say we printed out the client information the first time, then we come here and then we run. So let's say we update the client visits variable, and then we call that function. We call update visits, and then we actually pass the current value of that, right? So just to work through this, okay, so we call the function, we pass it the current value of the number of times the clients visited, and we store it in the same variable. So this is a copy of that variable is gonna be passed, right? So it's gonna pass in the number 3, it's gonna update that, it's gonna sum it up, it's gonna return it. So whatever is run here is not actually the same, it's not the same variable. So it's a copy that's passed, right? So you're calling by value. So the value is passed and it returns another value, and you store it in the same variable. It could be a bit confusing, but just rewatch the video if it's not making a lot of sense. But when you run that, it's going to store that value. So now we expect this value to be 1 more than whatever is actually here at the moment. So it should be 4. And then when we run this function again to print out the information, so let's clear this up and let's run it again. So now we see the first time it prints 3, the second time it prints welcome back, and it prints 4, right? We could also actually skip that shortcut. Like we could actually skip this, and we could actually just return visits plus 1. And same thing happens. Let me clear this up so you can see it. Run it, same thing happens. Another shortcut we could take is we could actually, instead of going through this intermediate step, we could actually just, because we only need to print this out. Now the problem with this is it doesn't update the value, but just to show you that this is actually possible, let me just comment that out. And you can actually call the function in as an argument to the other function. So when we print in the user, we could actually, instead of just putting the client visits as a variable, we could actually call a function as an argument. And this actually just reduces the line of code, but it depends on the context. Like you could do this, but sometimes it's not recommended. So because it's a bit harder to follow sometimes. But if you clear this up and you run it again, it's gonna be the same result here. So yeah, that's pretty much what a function is. This is the last concept, important concept, like in programming, I think you need to know. Watch my other videos on loops, on loops, conditionals, data types, and variables, and get the complete picture of the most important concepts you need to start programming as a beginner, and you would be able to like start writing your own programs and even your own software. Thank you.